Hello everybody and welcome back to what is sadly our final episode of our 4th Age Total War Dunland campaign, and this is a finale that has been forced on me by the game itself. I have run into, unfortunately, a quite rare but persistent bug which has led to crashes on end turn. What will happen is I'll click end turn, it'll go through a few AI moves, and then it will crash on one of those moves. The actual faction that it crashes on changes depending on who knows what, but it'll switch things up. This is something that does happen occasionally, very rare in my experience, and I've played this mod quite a lot. There are quite a few series of me playing various campaigns with 4th Age Total War on the channel here, and I believe this is the only one that has been forced to an early conclusion by crash. That is not to say that I have never had such crashes before. They do sometimes occur. Often you can get past it if you are persistent enough, if you look at the entire map and see if, for example, there are any AI-controlled settlements that are rebelling. You can sometimes get to the bottom of it. But with the case of this particular campaign, looking at the save, the last save that I made for it was back in near the end of February, and as of this recording, it is getting close to the end of May. That tells me that it's been quite a while since I've been looking into this. So it is rather unfortunate to wrap things up that way, but I don't want that to scare anyone away from the mod, because as I've said, this is a very rare kind of thing. Usually there is a way to work past it. I just didn't feel like digging all that much to get to the bottom of it in this case. And that's partly because, as you can see, I've sort of gotten a pretty secure position for myself. And in my own experience, once I get to that point, and that sort of sense of initial urgency, the initial early struggle for survival, once that phase is over, I need to have some pretty good momentum going into the mid-game to want me to persist with playing the campaign. Now, had I not been interrupted by that crash, I certainly would have continued, because I do have some clear goals, as we mentioned, going up the western slopes of the Misty Mountains, getting the orc holds that you can find throughout the Misty Mountains and further north potentially, and using that to train a sort of mixed cultic and orcish Dunlanding faction, as well as getting some other of their native units online. So I did have some interesting ambitions for this campaign, but I think it was just not meant to be. And rather than just sort of let this languish forever, I figured we may as well put a bow on this and call it the end. But let's go ahead and take a look at the campaign map and see how the rest of the factions have been doing. It's always interesting to do these sort of after the fact looks. Now, as we could tell in the north, in the last few episodes, we'd been struggling with a Dunabar. We had managed to get Tharbad under our protection, and they are still our protectorate, which is really nice. So we are the overlord of Tharbad, and we'd been using them for a bit of a buffer against a Dunabar. But as you can see, a Dunabar is working against them, and so we'd been moving our troops kind of back and forth, in and out of here, to try to maintain our buffer zone in the north, while we gradually moved north and then took out a Dunabar from the back, basically going through Rivendell over to Last Bridge and taking out their core settlements, which are these three right here. As you can see, a Dunabar does have some resistance left. They've got a stack and a half right outside of Last Bridge, another 3/4 of a stack or so around Ettendale. But other than that, most of their strength has been spent, it looks like. They've got a somewhat decent garrison around Mickledelving, but it's certainly nothing that we couldn't handle. And so our plan to sort of weaken them, to bleed them dry around the Shire, using Tharbad for that purpose, seems to have worked out fairly well. Now, in the last episode or two, I got a little bit distracted by the dwarves. I wanted to get trade from them. They wouldn't accept, and I took that as a pretext to just go ahead and attack Dwerodelf. And the crash is particularly problematic here because it means that I can't really proceed. What I would need to do, ideally, was wait for my reinforcements to get here and then wait for the dwarves to sally, or for Moria to submit. And there are 10 seasons remaining until surrender. I've got a force here that is rather weak. The force inside the Dwerodelf is strong enough to be a major problem for even this many troops. If you know the mod at all, then you know that some of these units are very, very strong. All Dwarven and Elven units are quite strong, but here the Dwarves have a couple of units of these Dwarven long axes, very elite, very well armored units. They've got a Durin's Guard family member for the general. They get a unit of archers, or actually two, which are not that big of a deal, but they're strong, you know, but they're just not, they don't have the firepower of a lot of other archer units. They've also got a unit of Dwarven axes and Dwarven warhammers, and my units here, as you can tell, are chewed up. They're very light. I've got some cavalry, but this is more of an open field ambush style army, and it's not really up to this task. So I was trying to get troops over to get retrained, first of all. As you can tell, I've got a lot of native troops. We had recently switched back to the cult, and so I've been able to train some of my Dunlanding hillmen, tribal pikes, and axes of the wolf. And it's been a little while since we could get units like this, because we had been cultic and we'd been training orcs. So that's also nice. But with the switch back to Ways of Darkness, we lost that roster. Again, that's something you can go back and forth with as Dunland, which is kind of an interesting aspect of their campaign. Both of their rosters, I think, are quite good for different purposes. We'd expanded basically to the sea. We'd left Londair in the hands of Tharbad. Theoretically, we could purchase this from them at a later date if we wanted it. And we've got basically as far as we want to go in the south. We've given Rohan Arundel. That's been totally fine. There's been no threat from them, and there's been no sign that the Reunited Kingdom is going to move up into here, which is really what this is all about. If you're playing Dunland, the biggest danger, in my opinion, is once you've dealt with Rohan, you just go over, take Hornburg, take Edoras, and you're pretty much all set with Rohan if you can handle that initial few turns. But the bigger problem is in the south, because the Reunited Kingdom is going to contest Arundel with you. So you could take this very early, but then you'll just have the Reunited Kingdom guys coming up here. And as this settlement has a very low population, it's not going to be the best grower or the best trainer for Dunland. So you may as well just give it to someone else. Now, the one nice thing about Arundel is that it does give you access to some Gondor-specific local levy-type units. You've got Gondorian hillmen, Gondorian axemen. So one of those is just a spear unit, very light, very cheap, but you don't need light and cheap units as Dunland. The other unit, though, the axe unit, is light and cheap and armor piercing. And that's kind of nice to have, just another one of those units as Dunland. But again, it's not quite as essential or unique in your roster as it is for a faction like the Reunited Kingdom, who can also train those units if they get it. So I don't see this as super necessary for Dunland. If you take this, you're going to have to not only defend from here via the Thornburg Keep, but also from down here, because this also borders Arundel. So the Reunited Kingdom may eventually take this settlement from the rebels, and then you'll have to defend Arundel against all of that. You might think, okay, well, I'll just take Thornburg Keep. Well, yeah, but then you also face this problem. Reunited Kingdom could work around you and get up here in the back. You could, of course, head down here. You've got a couple of settlements to sort of wall off this area, Pinnith Galen and Anphalis. You could push east, but as you can see, this is a big... you're now involved with not just a holding action, but a much bigger deal. And the Reunited Kingdom tends to train a lot of units around here. They tend to be quite good, and so you're going to need just a lot of numbers to overcome it. Speaking of the Reunited Kingdom, though, they're doing fairly well down here in Gondor. They're even moving into Mordor, as we knew, but they're running into trouble from Rune, actually, which is always nice to see, in my opinion. Rune has captured eastern Mordor, pretty much all of it, and they're now moving into the Nirn region. They've taken Morduath. They have taken Lond Nirnen, but lost it to a rebellion. They'll probably get this eventually. They've got a couple of stacks moving west against the Reunited Kingdom. Let's just check their diplomacy. The Reunited Kingdom is actually not at war with Rune, which is very interesting. So the Reunited Kingdom itself is at war with us, with the Dunabar, with Rovanion, and with Harad. So the Rovanion War is something that is also going to conclude probably fairly shortly here. I imagine the Reunited Kingdom is going to win this, and then either they're going to move to Thrimfeld, or maybe there's no family members here, and Rovanion will just be destroyed. This is not a great move for the Reunited Kingdom, or a Dunabar, or really any of these factions. It's something that you kind of need to do, I guess, on the one hand, because otherwise A faction like Dale might take it, or Rune, and you don't want those things to happen. But this territory doesn't give you that much. So being the Reunited Kingdom, being a Dunabar, and having all of this land to cover is a bit of a problem once you get up in this fairly borderless region where the borders are not easy to defend. But Rune itself is doing fairly well. They've still got their borders with Khand, no signs of trouble there, and in fact, Khand has exactly the initial settlements that it had on the campaign start. This is exactly what they start with, these 4, and that's exactly what they have. I imagine they conquered south, maybe even conquered west a little bit, but then lost it to Far Harad and Harad. Far Harad has expanded a little bit, no doubt at Khan's expense, and in Harad's expense, in the case of Karasagar, but they're probably going to be snuffed out pretty soon. We can see that although the numbers are evenly matched here, Harad is just going to be able to outproduce them. Look at this, full stacks. They've got another half stack coming. So I think Far Harad is going to end its days given enough time. Harondor is still alive, though, and that is acting as something of a check, I guess, on Haradrian expansion northward, and also it's distracting them from their eastward push against those other factions. So Harad is not yet the dominant power that it no doubt will be in a little while. The fact that they've managed to take and hold Rad Harnan, they've not lost Harlorn, these are all very bad signs for Harondor. And also, interestingly, Harad has a force north of the Poros for some reason. Emin Arnon is in Harondor's hands. You'll often see this. Harondor will take this, and you'll think, oh, wow, great, they must be doing very well. But they end up oftentimes in trouble down here. Sometimes Harondor can do very well indeed by taking and holding maybe even Akas Anaban. Rarely do I see them go much farther than that, but sometimes that's enough, just for the purposes of the campaign you're playing, to keep Harad off your back. Elsewhere in the north, we do have Dorwinion, who sort of off to an interesting expansion. Looks like they've been fighting with Rovanion, and have taken a couple of settlements off of them, moved down into Breg Estelad, but otherwise have done basically nothing. Diplomatically speaking, where's Dorwinion? They are at war with Rovanion, of course, and North Rune. Now, North Rune is down to just one settlement here, I think, Fornhood. Yeah, that's all they've got. And they are in a bit of trouble. They're, interestingly, not at war with Rune, but they are at war with Dale, the Dwarves, and Dorwinion, allied with Rovanion, so they chose their allies and enemies poorly, it looks like. Let's take a look at Rune, though. Their only enemy is with a Dunabar, which is very interesting. They don't share a border with a Dunabar at all at this point because, well, the Reunited Kingdom has taken them out of the south. Or the Reunited Kingdom plus Rune has taken out a Dunabar in the south. So, in terms of other factions in the north, looking to a Ryador, a Dunabar is really on its last legs. They've got one more, good battle, maybe 2 or 3, before we would take them out, and that'd pretty much be the end, unless that they start, making a ton of advancements via their settlements in the Shire. But as you can see, there's no settlements, no little villages around here. And by little villages, I mean this type of thing. These minor towns, just clusters of buildings. These are basically mines internally. They've been replaced with this little icon, and it's to represent the land tax function. The absence of these things means that a Dunabar has not built their dominion buildings here yet. Those dominion buildings represent your conquest, whether it's an outland, a fiefdom, or a homeland. It's your dominion over the land, and it's the point at which you start to take advantage of that land tax phenomenon. So they have not yet gotten to the point where they can build those dominion buildings, which is great news because it prevents them from making a ton of money. I think that if we were to quickly take Dwerodelf, right, like if we were to have gotten a bunch more units up here and then taken this out, which we would eventually, the dwarves don't have any other armies around here, and the elves are not expansionists, so we could just basically leave a skeleton garrison here and continue to the north without much concern. We would have a Dunabar pretty much on the ropes. They haven't done anything else in the north apart from taking some rebel settlements, which don't really count for a whole lot, unfortunately. They could theoretically be training Lossoth warriors out of here, which is always a cool unit to see. and they could be training some more orcs and trolls out of the mountain hold of Graham, in theory. They haven't done anything else, though. They haven't taken the high pass. That is still stacked full of rebellious orcs, wargs, probably a couple troll units. And the northern hold and Gundabad fortress are also still in rebel hands, which is very good news for me if I were to continue this campaign. The Bjornings have done a little bit. They've taken the Gladden hold, which is good. They've taken Andlang, which they don't start with. And they've taken Langwijk. Similarly, they don't start with that. They've also gone down to Mid-Deeping, and of course we gifted them East Hold to try to keep them alive and as a buffer between us and Rohan up here in the Wold. So, the Bjornings are doing okay. It doesn't seem like they've lost any ground yet or started a conflict with Dale, but they're not a major player. So again, I think that wraps up basically the state of the campaign for my Dunland campaign. Now, again, this will be sort of just a way to wrap things up, and it'll allow me the excuse, the feeling like I don't need to come back to this, and this will allow me to get on to other things. So I'll be giving that some thought. What campaigns would I like to try next? Another 4th Age campaign? Maybe something from the New Shadow, maybe something from an entirely different game. I've been tossing around some thoughts of going back to A Thrones Britannia, giving that another shot. But we'll see what the future holds. So there you go for your edification. Those of you who are maybe wondering whatever happened to the Dunland campaign, there it is. Unfortunately, ran into some crashes. Don't let that scare you away from the mod, though. It's very, very stable. This is an extremely rare kind of thing, but there it is. Always good to make saves and try to work things out. But at any rate, thank you very much for joining me for this episode. I hope you'll stick around with whatever is next. Of course, we do plan to continue Wayne Rider updates as those come out, seeing some very exciting new unit models coming out of Webba's work with some of the local levy units around the Wayne Riders map. So that'll be very, very interesting to see. But until the next time, everybody, take care.